Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Who's at the Table. My name is Sharissa Jackson, and I am the Chief Medical Executive of MVET. And we are here for another episode with Who's at the Table. And today I have a very inspirational, very motivational guest today. Her name is Kim Bailey, and she's going to tell us about her story. As you all know, Who's at the Table was created so women veterans can tell their stories. Our stories need to be heard. Our stories are valuable. We deserve to be at the table for those boardroom discussions. It's important for the world to know about the attributes we bring as important people in the community. And so we're going to hear more about Kim's story here in a little bit, but I want to say thank you to all of you who've been following the series. We're going to continue it strong. If you want to be a part of Who's at the Table, you can certainly send me a message. But until then, let's talk about our guest today. Again, she is here to give us her story and why she deserves to be at the table. Welcome, Kim, to the show. I so appreciate your time and being here today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here at the table.
Well, let's get right into it. Why do you feel you deserve to be here at the table?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, so many of us as female veterans have a really strong voice, and we learn some really good leadership skills in the military. So I feel like all of us have a very, special value to the table. Me personally, so I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I did 4 years active duty as a combat medic. And I feel, for me personally, having a spot at the table is really important because of both my experience, my personal life experience, but also because of my educational background. I do have a master's in social work. Oh, I have a bachelor's in sociology, a master's in social work with an emphasis on adverse childhood experiences. And I like to look at things really through an intersectional theory lens. And I'm working on my PhD in psychology with a focus on veteran incarceration and traumatic brain injuries. I think all of those things are really important to discuss, like the complexities of us as veterans.
I think that's wonderful. I mean, your accolades or something else, girl. PhD. Wow, that's so impressive. Congratulations to you on that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your military history. Why did you decide to come into the Army? I mean, there's other branches. Why not the Air Force? Why the Army for you?
Yeah, you know what, Air Force, that's a good question because when I got in the service, I always, I thought about, why didn't I not join the Air Force? But I think honestly, the reason why was when I started my decision to come into the military, I kind of come from, well, I was a prior foster youth and I was adopted at a very young age. And so coming into the military, I really wanted to find family and unit cohesion. And initially, I thought I wanted to join the Marines. And I had everything lined up. I was about to go. I thought that's where I want to be. But the reason why I chose not to join the Marines is because the recruiter was, I guess, hitting on me rather than actually treating me like a new recruit. So I feel like he really just didn't take me seriously. And so luckily for me, the next door neighbor to that office was an Army recruiter. And him and I are actually friends still to this day. He's an amazing person. And yeah, he started my Army career, so to speak, because of his just great leadership and not hitting on me. I think that was one of the key things that got me in the door.
Wow, that's incredible. It was different for me. My brother told me, without a shadow of a doubt, you will go into the Air Force. There was no other option for me, right? And so it's always interesting for me to ask guests, why they chose the branch that they chose. So thank you so much for telling me that story. So let's get into your story and some of the challenges. Most people who have been following me know that I created the Women's Veterans Journey Map. And, through every year of someone's enlistment, there's different challenges, particularly as women veterans that we face. And so I know your story is jam-packed with a lot of challenges that's on that women's journey map. So if for right now, tell us about your story and some of the challenges and some of the things that you experienced while you were on active duty.
Yeah, so like I said, my first initial experience, I guess, joining the military was possibly, a little bit of a tainted one. So with all this conversation lately with sexual harassment and sexual assault in the military, yeah, just knowing these stories is really important because we don't really get to talk about them as often, but it's very, very prevalent. So I learned really quickly that there was a culture of sexual harassment or potential trauma, I guess, so to speak. But my basic training was fun. It was great. We had a lot of camaraderie, a lot of unit cohesion. And that's the thing with military sexual trauma, why it's so impactful is because of that unit cohesion and that really strong bond that we make with each other. And so my first duty station, once I got over there, it was overseas, so I wasn't in the States. So already we're out of our comfort zone, right? Flying overseas, not having a good support network, coming into a brand new unit, not knowing exactly what to expect because you're a brand new soldier. And right away, within the first year of my enlistment, I experienced a sexual assault, a pretty severe sexual assault by a non-commissioned officer. So somebody in a leadership position. I actually ended up having a traumatic brain injury from it. I had a really significant head injury. And because of that strong unit cohesion and that strong military bonds, I didn't feel like I had a safe space to disclose that information to anybody. So I originally had only told like another friend, another soldier of mine, but we decided to keep it to ourselves and not tell anybody. So I was trying really hard to just navigate my military, like right after the event happened, with the head injury and trying to figure out how to best continue without telling anybody about it. But I learned really quickly that I couldn't keep it a secret because I ended up ended up getting pregnant from the assault. And so that was extremely traumatic. Most people who are not military don't really understand how HIPAA or how privacy acts work in the medical field in the military. But if it is something that could affect your combat readiness or your deployment readiness, the command usually has to find out about it. And so I wasn't able to keep that part a secret. And so eventually it kind of came out, and everybody in the unit found out about it. And so when we talk about retaliation or about how unit cohesion can be like a detrimental impact to survivors, this is one of the reasons why. I mean, the unit kind of pretty much labeled me as not a team player, a betrayer. I want to say it was kind of like a unit bullying that had started to happen. I wasn't able to eat in the cafeteria anymore. I wasn't able to walk down the hallway without people turning around as soon as they saw me and walking away. And that kind of went on for a couple months after the incident. And I had to get passes to eat outside of the cafeteria just so that I could eat without hostility. And I actually ended up having to take a leave of absence for a little while. They gave me a whole month of leave of absence. And I actually didn't end up keeping the baby. And so when I came back to my unit after that, I immediately just kind of wanted things to go back to normal. I didn't want to be, of course, I didn't want to go right back into the hostility. So so that's kind of where I was in my first enlistment to my first duty station, just getting acclimated to military culture. That's a super traumatic incident that happened right in the beginning.
And I mean, thanks so much for disclosing. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how you felt to be isolated from the rest of your team members, and how it had to have felt to know that everybody knew your business, and though you didn't report, the mere fact that it did get out, and there was kind of sort of like retaliation because you walking up and down the halls and people are turning around and you eating by yourself. I mean, how did you cope through that? I mean, you're brand new, you're young. How did you find the fortitude to cope through all of that?
Yeah, at that time it was really difficult to do. I was doing maladaptive coping strategies, and now that I have a mental health background, and I understand kind of how trauma impacts us, and kind of how some of the negative behaviors can manifest through negative coping strategies, I can see that, yeah, I did a lot of negative coping strategies back then. And one of those things was alcohol, using alcohol to cope. That was kind of a military cultural thing as well, though. So it was kind of almost a way for me not to be isolated, I would say, is continuing to engage in those behaviors, and kind of normalizing that for myself, because I felt like that was really the only avenue that I had to, I guess, both cope with what happened and also make relationships happen within my unit.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us were medics, and so alcohol was one of those coping strategies that I think a lot of people in the military can agree upon, that's a normal coping strategy.
Yeah, and hearing your story, I want, and I ask this a lot of my guests, is you did have the courage to go and tell somebody. And I know of some of my other guests, they never told anyone, but for you to at least tell somebody, what was that initial response from that person that you chose to tell, and why did you choose to tell that particular person?
Yeah, it was actually an airman. So she was in charge of me. She was my NCO, I should say, and in the medical unit that I was in. And so when I first came to her, and I think during this time, because this was back in 2006, I want to say, we didn't have the programs that we have currently when it comes to sexual assault prevention and things like that. So I don't think she was really prepared, I should say, to have this conversation with me because she really didn't know what to do with the news. Because when I came to her, it wasn't really about just the sexual assault because that had already happened a few weeks ago, almost a little more than a month ago. But it was really about the now I'm pregnant. What do I do? And I need your help.
Mhm.
And so originally she didn't really know what to do. So she said, we need to talk to the commander immediately. We need to figure out what to do. And so I went to the office of the commander and we sat there in silence for a little while. And they kind of wanted to pressure me into telling them who it was. I really didn't want to say because he was, of course, an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, and I really didn't want to say who it was because I was afraid of what would happen if I said that. And so it took them like a couple meetings with me to persuade me to even say who it was. And then once I said who it was just everywhere, all over the unit.
And so, did you feel supported by that individual, your NCO that you told, and did you feel supported by your commander once you did disclose?
Honestly, I feel like at the time, they may have done I feel like they had good intention of how to help me, but I don't think at the time they knew how to. Because, like I said, I don't think we had a lot of programs that were specifically in place for sexual prevention and assault. Which, for me, working with veterans, women veterans now, um, I'm not that old when it comes to like these new policies in place. It wasn't that long ago that they weren't in place. So people like me who are now on our healing journeys, trying to heal from these extensive traumas and not being able to feel supported at that time that really played a huge impact in our mental health going forward. So I think they had good intentions. I don't think they had very good, I guess, protective places in place for something like that to happen. So they didn't really. I don't think I really felt supported at that time. No.
Yeah, and to know that brand new, young, knew the military was the way for you to go. You had that encounter with the Marine recruiter, and to know that you had that encounter, I can only imagine how many other young women have had those encounters across the board. And I can relate to that because when I was choosing to come into the military, I knocked the ASVAB out the park. So all the recruiters were looking to recruit me. And I remember one particular recruiter was an Army recruiter. And this guy, I mean, he was praying and pouncing like nobody's business on me. And it took my father just noticing, why is this guy calling my daughter at the same time every night and on the phone with her, just talking. And my father actually picked up the phone and he was listening to our conversation. Again, I'm young, impressionable. I'm not, leading this guy on. I'm just thinking he's going to help me get into the military. And my father heard this guy on the phone saying some things that was very inappropriate about what he wanted to do to me physically, just totally inappropriate. And I would never forget my father. And my father doesn't curse. He's a deacon in the church. My father laid it in his behind on that phone that day.
Yeah.
And that guy never called me again. And my father came and told me after that incident happened, he sat me down. He said, you don't deserve that. And you're not going to ever let anyone talk to you like that or treat you that way. And to know that my father stood up for me in that moment with that recruiter, because I never went to my father. And there were multiple conversations that me and this recruiter had prior to my father noticing, this ain't right. Why is this guy calling my daughter every night, at the same time? So for my father to have that perception and then to intervene, I felt I had that support. That's why I asked you that question. When you
Yeah.
did go and tell somebody, when you did go and confront the commander, were you supported either emotionally, or did they do something to that person that you said, you know, did this sexual assault? What was the verdict in all of this?
Yeah. So now that you kind of sparked that memory in that situation. So actually, so I had been, so the situation happened because I had been drinking the night before. It was a work day. I had been drinking the night before with friends. He was our sober driver, is how the incident happened. And he had, like, I guess, slipped a card into my door lock, is how it had occurred. And so when I came forward and said that to my commander, the first thing that they did was put me in an alcohol substance abuse program. So it was almost like
It's your
immediate
fault.
retaliation. Yeah, it was an administrative retaliation for me saying it, but they pressured me to say who it was. And had I not disclosed that information, I don't know what they would have done outside of that. I mean, I can say that he did. I think he did try his best to hold that person accountable. The reason why I didn't find justice in my particular case, and this is why I maybe didn't feel like I was best supported, was, of course, that first initial reaction was, you know what, we need to make sure that she knows her place. Like, we need to make sure that she knows how she made a mistake in this situation, and that her mistake, needs to be rectified first. That was like the initial reaction, and then after that, they tried to hold him accountable. But when I came back from my leave and I was no longer pregnant anymore, they sat down with me and they had a conversation with me about, do you even want to move forward anymore, because there's no longer some solid evidence, right? In this case, it would be like a he said, she said situation. He's saying no, you're saying yes, and I'm like, you know what? I just want things to go back to normal. I don't want to pursue this because this has already been very difficult for me. Everything, right? And we talk about moral injuries, we talk about, mental health conditions. I know now what I was experiencing back then, but at the time I didn't have those skills or those language skill sets to be able to advocate for myself at that time. So I was very impressionable to be like, you know what? I think they know best. I think that they're telling me this is what I need to do because they have my best interest. And for me, I went down a huge path of self-destruction after that. I don't think that there was any supportive resources given to me. There was no, hey, do you need to speak to somebody? Do you think that you need to have some counseling with somebody because of this? It was kind of like, well, okay, now that we're gonna move on from here, and not we're not gonna talk about it again. And that's kind of what happened.
And so how did that feel? I mean, I can't you're impressionable. Apparently, the pregnancy was no longer a problem anymore. So you got to deal with that. And as women, having to deal with the loss of that, and now people know your business in the squadron because if they knew you were pregnant, now they know you're not pregnant. So it was almost like this whole scandal is going on within your squadron, and no one was there to lend a helping hand or to offer you a shoulder to cry on. How did you, I know you mentioned alcoholism was a way for you to cope, but how do you move past this? How did you move past it?
When I was active duty, I didn't move past it, because remember, I mentioned that I had the head injury as well. So that never got spoken about, because when the other stuff was like the main priority, I never really got a medical examination. I never really had a discussion about was there any other things that happened. It was kind of yeah, it was. I don't honestly don't think that they handled the situation correctly. I mean, looking backwards, I can see where the gaps in services were, of course. But so I was having residual effects from the concussion that I had. I was falling asleep a lot. I was getting in trouble for falling asleep. I was forgetting things often. I had a lot of cognitive dysfunction because of the head injury. I had basically a post-concussion syndrome, and I was non-treated and non-diagnosed. I know I had a couple x-rays of my head, but other than that, I really didn't get a lot of medical support for that. And then I actually attempted suicide, actually, on active duty as well. And so when that happened, at that time, nobody was talking about the incident, because I want to say almost a year after the actual incident had occurred. And I was just having a really difficult time not being able to talk about it and like internalizing it. And then having to do the regular medical stuff that we did, patient care, severely injured soldiers that were coming through, directly from the air vacs. We got them directly from the field, directly to us. We had to stabilize them. So we were already kind of having compassion fatigue, I want to say, and like compassion trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was dealing with this other stuff going on internally and not being able to really talk about it or have safe spaces to talk about it. So yes, I did. I was in the mental health ward, or in the hospital, I guess I should say, for about 2 months, a little less than 2 months. And on my exit exam, a mental health provider who was kind of like just checking to see where I was so that I can go back to active duty, he pretty much told me that we don't want weak dogs in the Army. And so he asked me if I was going to continue in these behaviors. And he gave me a choice. Either you continue in these behaviors and I'm going to label you as a personality disorder and you're going to be chaptered out of the military, or you can have a postpartum depression or have some sort of a diagnosis here and continue on in your active duty service, have a great career. And I, of course, at the time, I was like, well, I choose this avenue. And so I learned really quickly at that moment too that I don't think about it. And I have to really become more resilient. Like, how do I become more resilient? How do I make sure that this does not become a problem so that my career could continue? And so I really didn't have safe spaces at all to speak about what was going on with me.
Wow. I mean,
So when I asked for help, that's kind of the barrier that I was, that I hit.
yeah, I mean, that's tough. And so was your family available for you to disclose what was going on? Did you have a supervisor that was there available to you? It seemed like it was this whirlwind of a lot of things happening with you trying to figure it out on your own, and you had no core person that you could trust. And that's the issue that we're seeing in the military now, is that young girls don't have someone to trust and feel like, can I go and disclose and feel like they're going to give me that support that I need? So did you have family? I mean, because when you got to that pit and you felt as though your life was more important and you're going to take your life to get out of it. I mean, who did you have? Who did you have?
Um, Really, honestly, to tell you the truth, I didn't have a good support network. And that's one of the things that I like to make sure that other people understand, is that supportive networks are they're crucial, especially if you're in the aftermath of a trauma. You have to find a safe space. You have to find supportive areas to speak about things. I didn't have that. I mean, coming from like the foster youth system and then coming into an adopted family, I really didn't have a strong family connection prior to coming in the military. So I think that kind of set me up for, I guess, failure in how to look for supportive networks. And if they weren't readily available to me or readily provided to me, I don't think I knew how to seek them out. Yeah, I didn't have the skill set.
I think a lot of women follow your story because they do come in with different reasons and for different reasons. I came into the military because I wanted I didn't want my family to pay for my education, right? We have people that
Right.
come into the military because they are avoiding things at home or running away from things at home. And so I'm sure there's people that can relate to your story to say, I started from foster care. I was adopted, and I really didn't have that normal family life. So therefore, I didn't have somebody that I can confide in. And then you come into the military, young, brand new, naive, and you don't have anyone that's holding your hand and walking you through the process. And then to have the incident that you had, I mean, it was almost as if, for lack of better words, you were doomed, after you had this incident. And that's just so unfortunate. And then to know that you wanted to take your life because you was just like, I just can't do it. I couldn't, you couldn't cope anymore. And to then have the doctor say to you, well, if you want to stay in, this is what I'm going to diagnose you with, or we can kick you out. I mean, how did you move past all of that? I mean, you had to have the tenacity and the perseverance, but what other challenges did you go through? Because you're here now, so you had to figure it out somehow.
Yeah, I did. And that's the whole empowerment, I guess, of like my story, or what I like to share with others. Like why I kind of chose to openly share my story so authentically, I guess, is because I'm not in that space anymore. I did find an avenue to get out. But after that happened, I decided, of course, to get out the military. I didn't want to stay. I did my active duty time. I decided to, get out. And so once I got out, I didn't honestly right away feel like the VA was a good space for me.
Oh,
I
wow.
didn't really know much about the VA at the time, but I didn't trust the military. And so I think leaving the service, I really didn't have trust in military related systems. And so I didn't originally enroll in veterans care. I didn't get any benefits. The only thing that I was actively getting was education benefits. I did actively pursue my GI Bill.
Okay.
I was married to a soldier at that time. And so I was a dependent. And so I felt like I could, utilize that, go to school, take care of. I had children at that time when I got out of the system. I mean, out of the service. Um, and so that the marriage kind of fell apart. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I'm not going to go into that detailed story. But when that happened, when we decided to divorce, and I had to like move off base and had to figure out my way, that's when I really like went downhill, hit rock bottom. Um, and because he was kind of not in the picture at that moment, so it was just me and my children and trying to survive basically by any means necessary. I didn't feel like I could go back home. I didn't feel like I had a place to go after that, and I wasn't seeking services at the VA at that time. So that's when I kind of found myself homeless. I kind of found myself just trying to figure out like what was next. And it's funny because I had credentials as a medic. I had that experience in the military, but I chose, I guess, not to use those services. Honestly don't know why. I think I just was trying to survive just by any means necessary. And that wasn't, I guess, part of it. Maybe I didn't want to fall back on those skills because I think I had a lot of unresolved trauma at that time. So I was just trying to move on with my life. But that didn't really happen. So I had taken my children to go stay with a relative, just a relative of my husband at the time. So I could kind of get back on my feet and get a job and things like that. So it was like a temporary thing just so I could get a job and find a place for us to stay. But in the meantime of all of that, I ended up getting arrested a few times. And so that kind of led me into this spiral of criminal justice system. And it took me almost a year to get out of that because that was like a continuous cycle for me. I had a stroke. I had a physical stroke during this time of this process because I was just coping with very inappropriately. And so I think what started my healing journey and what started like this process into where I'm at now really was a conscious choice. Like I had to make a decision. Do I want to continue on this road and end up dying? Or do I want to actually have my story have a meaning, have a purpose? And of course, I chose the other avenue. And it wasn't an easy step. It wasn't an easy, road to go on because, of course, when you're in that kind of a situation, when you have criminal justice situation, you have to take the necessary steps in order to get out of that part first. So it's like a baby steps. Like this is the first thing you have to do, then the next thing, and then the next thing. And I just continued on this cycle of improving myself, even though it was hard, even though it was difficult, taking the necessary baby steps until I got to the point where I was able to go to school. Then I got my bachelor's, then I got my master's, now I'm in my PhD program, and I never looked back. So I think it just kind of started with that moment of, do I want to live? And that was the pivotal moment for me.
And I think we all have to face that decision at some point in our lives if we're going down that spiral of doing things that are not good for ourselves. We have to figure out, okay, do I continue to take this road or do I fork off and go somewhere else and do something better? And I applaud you for all of your efforts. And I know as a single mom, with twin daughters, having to get out the military and you having to, hit a rough patch and being homeless and then having to take your kids and give them to your later divorced husband's family. Take us through that process of what you were feeling and how were you feeling? Were you feeling hopeless? Were you feeling betrayed because you left the military, you were devoted to the military, and now you got out and now you're struggling? I mean, what were you feeling going through all of that?
Yeah, and I think those are really good questions to ask. I think that for so many sexual assault survivors, not just military sexual assault, but just in general, we go through this period of shame and guilt and kind of internalizing those feelings of not being good enough or not being able to protect yourself good enough and then not being able to protect your children good enough and things like that. So of course I was feeling all of those things. I don't think that I had actually found a proper way to really I guess get over that stuff or really resolve those issues. And that was one of the reasons why I kind of went down to rock bottom, is because I wasn't really actively taking care of my mental health at that time. Because of course I didn't know then, but I had post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was going through a lot of those symptoms, the flashbacks, the nightmares. But I was coping maladaptively, so I wasn't really seeing the symptoms. Like I wasn't able to really see them at the time because I was trying so hard to avoid them and pretend like they weren't there. Um, and so yeah. I was going through that, plus just feeling like a failure as a mom, feeling like a failure as a soldier, feeling like I wasn't being very resilient, even though I had gotten through, I thought I had gotten through the worst part of my life with the military. And I thought I got out of it. I got free. I'm safe. I'm alive. Right. And then I wasn't good, you know? And then so I really went through a lot of emotions, I should say.
Yeah.
It's really hard to pinpoint like what was the worst part of it.
And then when you talk about hitting rock bottom, you talked about the sexual assault, you talked about the attempt of suicide, and you talked about the homelessness and going through the divorce. And as you are spiraling, you mentioned, you know, just hitting rock bottom. What does that mean, and what does that look like?
Yeah, rock bottom. Well, I say this often in some of the speaking engagements that I do. I hit rock bottom like 5 times. Like I thought that I hit rock bottom, but then I thought I couldn't get any lower, and then I hit lower, and then I hit lower, and I hit lower. I think for me, just being in the criminal justice system in general, that was a huge rock bottom for me because I was a straight A student in high school. I was a cheerleader in high school. I never would have seen myself in a position like this. So when I got to this position and I looked back on how did I get here, it was like it was a really, I guess, insightful point in my life. I think being incarcerated in general, you have a lot of time to think about how did you get here to this spot, and you don't have the coping strategies that you were using previously to that. So I think that was like a really insightful time. I can really look back and see what were the steps to get me here and how many rock bottoms am I really gonna hit? Because I thought that I was gonna be just going to school and having a college degree and doing all these wonderful things with my life. And then I found myself there. And it just, yeah, it was a really shameful time for me. I honestly just started openly talking about this part of my life very, very recently, maybe within the last year, because it was such a shameful time. Like, it's really embarrassing to speak about that. But I feel like it's important because with the work that I do with mentoring, other people who have been incarcerated, other veterans who have been incarcerated, I really want them to feel like they have the power to take back their life, because if they feel like stagnant in that section, like they can't get out of that cycle of criminal justice or just maladaptive coping strategies, they can. And there's complete hope for them. They have, like, especially with military members, they have so much unlimited potential and capabilities of being successful that I feel like, that's one of the reasons why I feel like I kind of went through a lot of those things and hit those rock bottoms, was because now I'm able to show other people that, yes, you can get out of there. Yes, you can make a difference in this world, and you don't have to stay there at all.
And I will say this, and hearing your story, you have to know that you should not feel ashamed. You should be brave in knowing that you're able to tell your story. I tell people all the time, your story can be a testimony to somebody else and help them get out of that pit that they're in. And like you said, those troubled times that you were in, the rock bottoms that you were in, hearing your story can show somebody that if she went through all of that, I certainly can go through what I've been through. So I don't know what you're going through today, but don't you ever, from this day forward, be ashamed of your story. Continue to operate in resilience and persevere through any other challenges that you are encountering or will encounter. Because if you went through all of that, there's absolutely nothing, I'm telling you, there's absolutely nothing you cannot get through. And don't ever, 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 your journey is your journey. And I tell people all the time, my life is not like someone else's life. I can tell somebody and give a testimony to my life, and people say, good Lord, girl, how did you get through that? We all have our own stories. We all have our own journeys. But I do believe being brave enough to tell our stories impacts this world. And that's the gift that we give to people if we're brave enough to do it. So your bravery is definitely shining bright. I appreciate you being brave enough to do it. I know it's difficult. There's shame in some of the stuff that we all go through. I mean, there are things I can sit here and be like, girl, you did what?
Absolutely, yeah.
but at the end of the day, we're who we are. And no one can judge us for what we've been through, because we all have our own stuff and nobody's perfect. And so as you continue to go throughout your journey of being a motivational speaker and being out here advocating for women, just know the more you do it, the more you're going to have your head held high, the more you're going to stump those red bottoms, and you're not going to give a care when you walk into a room, who says what after the fact, because people are going to appreciate your courage. And I just have to say that from the heart. You're courageous in doing what you're doing. Don't stop doing what you're doing. There's somebody out here that you're going to bless with your story. And don't ever be ashamed of where you come from. It's not where you are now. And that's the bottom line.
Actually, thank you so much. I appreciate those words. Yes, I do agree. I think that I speak so candidly about my story because I'm not there anymore. I think that's the most important part. Like especially with all that's been going on with the Vanessa Guillen case, which is impacted so many of us, and military sexual trauma has been a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not safe, you don't feel like you're safe or you're grounded enough to publicly tell your story, I think it's really important that you don't feel like you're pressured to do that. Because I know for me, if I was in the spot that I was previously in those positions, I wouldn't have felt safe or comfortable to publicly talk about these things. So I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of healing work to get to this place in my life currently. And I think we just can't, I guess, sidestep those things, those healing processes. It's a process. It's a everyday, lifelong process to heal from trauma. And I don't think you have to rush it. Don't feel, like you have to publicly speak about it. But when you're comfortable doing it, if you choose to, then yes, your testimony can be somebody's survival guide one day, potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, and I tell people in terms of my PTSD story, I say to folks all the time that old Sharisa will never be the new Sharisa. And I've had to learn how to live in this new normal that I'm having to live through, because the things that I saw, the things that we had to do while we're on those 4 deployments that I was on, it changed me. And I would never be that same mom, that same friend, that same sister, that same girlfriend that I was prior to seeing and doing the things that I did. So I had to go through that process of accepting myself for the new person that I had become. But my timeline to do that was totally different than someone else's timeline who was there at the same time seeing the same things that I saw. And I think it's very pivotal for a lot of people to know that how they heal, how long it takes them to heal, when they decide to tell their story, how they decide to tell their story, is on them. And it doesn't have to mimic what someone else does or how someone else tells them to do it. It's all about their own process and their own journey.
Yes, it took me 10 years to get to this space. I mean, and that's not an overnight journey. It was a 10-year journey of hard work. So yeah, exactly. It could take 10 years, it could take 5 years, it could take 2 years. But it's all, a personal journey. Yeah, definitely.
But when you get across that finish line and you reflect on where I was to where I am today, I mean, how does that make you feel? How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it is like I look back on my journey and I'm just like, wow, like how did I get here? And I remember like in those rock bottom positions that I was at, I asked the same questions. How did I get here? What is wrong? I used to ask, what is wrong with me? And now I can look back and be like, how did I get here? And like in a good, positive way. So it's the same question, just with a different mentality, different mindset. But it does feel surreal sometimes because I tell my story so often now, and like when I write and when I talk to other people, that it does feel like a story like that I'm telling, because I don't always have and sometimes you have to do that in order to like be able to tell a story like this, is to be able to look at it like like a life journey type of a story, instead of feeling like you're living in those moments. That's also part of the healing journey. But yeah, I guess I'm excited that I've been able to get through all that stuff. I mean, it does feel powerful to be able to stand here today and say, yeah, I'm still here and I'm still doing this thing, right?
You rock. That's what it is. And again, I say this to you all the time. You're braver than you think you are. And the more you go through this and you continue to do what you're doing, you're going to be like, oh, let me pop my collar. I did okay, and I'm doing okay, right? And
Yeah.
so let's get into my favorite part of the show, which is the rapid fire.
Gosh,
That
yes.
gives you an opportunity just to, give me some quick responses to some things. And it's really fun, and everyone kind of loves this part because, it's an opportunity for you just to think off the cuff, and people get to really feel that genuineness and authenticity that you have in these rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I think
Okay.
so.
So the first
Go
one
ahead.
is, my life without the military would have been.
Less intense, I should say. Less blessed even. I know Portia, I think, said something similar in one of your previous episodes, was that she felt like she was blessed because of all the experiences she had. I kind of feel similar. Yeah.
Nice.
Right.
My story is changing lives because.
It's real. It's full of passion. I feel like, yeah, I think with my story, with the real life experiences that I have, I'm able to just connect with a wide range of people and be able to resonate with them and just really understand some of the pain they may be experiencing, because I felt that pain too.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think it's definitely just the real life experiences that I have. Yeah.
And so the pain that you say you had experienced, what are some of those pains?
Just feeling alone, feeling isolated, feeling shame, that shame and guilt that I was saying, feeling like there wasn't safe spaces to talk about these things. That's kind of where that pain, I think, manifested.
Okay. So obviously you're an advocate out here. You're happy. I see the joy exuding through this camera. Happiness to you is.
Something you deserve. I feel like everyone deserves to be happy. And once you choose to to really internalize that feeling, I think that's when you find happiness.
3 healing areas of your life are.
I think self-compassion is a really important healing tool. Being able to look at the stuff that I did, like we talked about the shame and guilt, being able to be self-compassionate to the point where you can forgive yourself for some of those bad choices that you made.
Mhm.
That was a pivotal healing moment for me. I think body is really important, taking care of your body physically. But that, I think for me personally, that encompasses like body, mental, and spiritual, like holistic healing, I should say. And another thing that was really healing for me was, I guess, psychoeducation. I feel like with my educational journey, and I chose to go into the mental health field, having that knowledge really put things into perspective for me about some of the things that were happening to my brain, some of the things that were happening to my body during the traumatic moments that I had experienced, even intergenerational trauma that I, like, once I started learning what that meant and how that manifested in my life, that was like a super pivotal moment in my healing process.
And so for healing, I'm also, I know we didn't touch on this much, but you did make a reference to your TBI. So you said that the military didn't diagnose it. It went, no one even realized that you had this TBI, though you had symptoms of it. So have you healed from the TBI? Where are you now with the TBI?
Yeah, I've actually started, well, actually because of COVID. So we're in the middle of a pandemic. So I haven't actually had the, I guess I would say, like, medical support for that. But when it comes to traumatic brain injuries, they are incredibly different for each person, how they experience them or how the symptoms manifest. For me, I think because it went so long unchecked, and because I also have symptoms, or I did have symptoms, I guess I still do, of post-traumatic stress disorder, some of those symptoms kind of can combine or look similar to each other. And so I know some of the cognitive issues that I have, memory, just sometimes stuttering, I had to work on that, with language, people that helped with my language skills. And even now, I wouldn't say I'm fully healed from it, even though it's been so long. I think that just recognizing that the healing journey is a never ending healing journey, and just being able to adjust accordingly, is really key in like continuing on in that healing journey. So yeah, so I'm still, I guess, actively having to work on some of those things. Like I have to take sometimes longer times to read or longer times to think about things, to cognitively process things. But yeah, I mean, it's possible. It's just, it can be a little bit more difficult sometimes or challenging when you have a disability.
Yeah. And last fire's track question here is, empowering others mean.
I guess that one's kind of a difficult one. I guess giving them the tool set to be able to actively pursue their own healing. Like I love being able to provide somebody else with the power to heal themselves. Like I like to just be like a supportive tool for them because everybody has the power to do this. Everybody has the power to be amazing and great. Sometimes they just need the supportive tools to be able to find that power within themselves.
All right, we are at the end of the show, but before we end the show, I want you to give one last message to the viewers that you think is important during this time, not only during COVID, we're all quarantined, but of course, you know, the advocacy work you're doing for women veterans during this time. So what would be your final message that you would want to give to the viewers?
I think it's really important for you to take care of yourself. We can be advocates, like I tell everybody right now, we can be advocates, we can be passionate about the gaps in services and trying to fill those gaps in services. But if we're pouring from an empty cup and we're not able to help other people, then we need to make sure that we are refilling ourselves with self-care, self-compassion, self-love in order to be able to effectively help others, especially when we're talking about this huge movement with military sexual trauma and the Justice for Vanessa Guillen movement that's happening currently. We just really need to maintain our self-care, I think is really important.
And so where can viewers find you? What are you doing? What's coming up for you? What are you into right now so people can follow you?
Yeah, so I do blog on my Invisible Combat platform, which is on Instagram and Facebook. It's just basically Invisible Combat, both places you can find me. I do have a podcast that I run. It has been a little bit kind of on the back burner right now because there's other stuff that I'm working on. But I have a co-host. It's called Shiro Hotline. We focus on military and veteran mental health. And especially right now, we have a lot of sexual trauma that's happening. It's resurfacing. People are having old wounds reopened right now because of this substantial, national crisis, I should say. And so right now, I'm actively working on some campaigns for justice for Vanessa Guillen. It's a group that I created underneath Invisible Combat, and we actually are starting to work on unifying some of the other states. So we have groups that are active in each state. We're working on getting a representative for each state to help just provide information on protests, peaceful protests, vigils that people want to have, connecting maybe civilians who really want to be in this active role with veterans who also have a voice in this, in this discussion. And we're just making sure that we give the best supportive tools, mental health support, advocacy toolkits that we need to give to people in order to have the biggest impact and the biggest voice. Currently, I'm working with a grassroots effort with other veterans and service leaders, service member leaders, in solidarity with Vanessa's family. So we are working to have a congressional letter be presented with some demands in regards to just a congressional inquiry, in regards to Vanessa's chain of command, having that investigated. We do have some concerns, I should say, about Fort Hood and the surrounding area that we want to have addressed. And some of the other demands are no justice, no enlistment for our youth. We feel like unless they can protect our youth and provide effective systemic protection, so this kind of stuff doesn't happen, military sexual trauma, sexual harassment, tragedies like Vanessa's case, I don't feel like we should be encouraging enlistments at this moment until they effectively handle some of these things. So that's kind of the advocacy work that we're doing currently, and that I'm a part of. And if anybody wants to sign on to that congressional letter or be a part of the efforts, they can always send me an email. It's justice for Vanessa Guillen now @gmail.com. You can send an email. We can help just find or connect you with other people in your area that are also holding peaceful protests or vigils, and then also try to connect you with some veteran advocates in your area.
Wow, a lot. And so hopefully you're taking care of yourself, being that you are
Self-care, right?
advising all of us to do self-care. I know it has to be a lot. It can be overwhelming. It can be stressful in this advocacy space, but I do appreciate your time. I do appreciate everything you're doing. If there's anything that ANVETS can do for you, just know that we're here to support. But I just appreciate you being here, being honest, being so passionate about your story. I see a light on the horizon for you, and just continue to push through whatever you're going through and know that you're impacting this world in a major, major way. And I appreciate you being here on the show today.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. So this concludes our show for today. Thank you all for watching. Again, you have heard Kim Bailey's story. She's giving you ways to reach out to her. If you want to support her efforts, definitely reach out to her. If you want to be on Who's at the Table, you can certainly reach out to me at cjackson@amvets.org. And hopefully you found this series to be something that is impacting and encouraging and motivating and inspiring you in your journey, whatever they may be. So thank you all so much, and have a wonderful, blessed, safe day. And hopefully you will watch the next show. And I thank you for your support. Thank you. Bye.